In the sweltering haze of a forward operating base in Helmand province, where the air hung heavy with the metallic tang of blood and the distant crack of gunfire, a nurse named Elena Vargas faced down the one enemy she couldn't fight with bandages or morphine: ridicule. Her gloves, frayed at the edges, patched with duct tape from a dozen desperate repairs, drew snickers from the other medics as she prepped for another wave of casualties. "What, you saving those rags for a museum?" one quipped, his voice slicing through the tension like shrapnel, while the others chuckled, too exhausted to care about the cruelty in their words. But Elena just tightened her jaw, her dark eyes steady, because in that moment, with the choppers inbound and screams already piercing the night, mockery was the least of what could break a soul. Those laughs faded fast when the Black Hawk touched down, rotors whipping sand into a blinding storm, unloading a SEAL team shredded by an IED ambush, limbs mangled, faces ashen, the kind of wounds that made even battle-hardened docs whisper prayers under their breath. Elena dove in without a word, her torn gloves slick with the first rush of arterial spray, staunching bleeds and barking orders like a general in scrubs, her hands a blur of quiet fury amid the chaos. The lead corpsman shot her a sideways glance, his earlier smirk gone, replaced by the grim math of who might make it through the hour. And as the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry hornets, casting long shadows over the gurneys, one warrior's fate hung by a thread thinner than her latex scraps, pulling her into a fight that would redefine them both. Jake Harlan was the anchor of that team, a broad-shouldered chief with tattoos snaking up his arms like war stories etched in ink, the man who'd pulled his brothers from the blast radius only to catch the full force of the secondary explosion across his chest. He lay there now, chest heaving in ragged bursts, shrapnel peppering his ribs like cruel confetti, his blue eyes glazing over as shock clawed at his edges. Elena knelt beside him, ignoring the sting of sweat in her own cuts, her voice a low anchor in the storm. "Stay with me, Chief. You've got a team counting on you, waking up ornery as hell." He tried to grin through the pain, but it cracked into a gasp, his hand twitching toward hers, ghostly pale against the blood-soaked sheets. What happened next would silence the doubters forever, but first she had to will him back from the brink, one heartbeat at a time, hours blurred into a fever dream of sutures and IV drips. The hospital tent, a pressure cooker of beeps and muffled cries, where the scent of antiseptic warred with the coppery reek of mortality. Elena's gloves gave way completely on Jake's third bleed-out scare, splitting along the seam as she clamped a vessel with her bare fingers, the warm pulse of his life thrumming against her skin like a desperate Morse code. "Get me fresh ones," she snapped. But supplies were ghosts themselves, rationed to the bone after weeks of unrelenting hits. And the corpsman who'd mocked her earlier just shook his head, hands full with another Marine. In that raw, ungloved moment, with Jake's blood mingling with hers, she felt the weight of every choice that led her here. The husband she'd left stateside, the letters piling up unread, the quiet vow she'd made after her own brother's flag-draped coffin. Sacrifice wasn't a word in her world. It was the air she breathed. Yet, as Jake's eyelids fluttered, murmuring something incoherent about shadows in the dust, she wondered if this time the cost would claim more than her hands. Dawn crept in like a thief, painting the tent in bruised purples and golds. But the real light broke when Jake stirred, his voice a gravelly rasp cutting through the post-op hush. The team hovered at the edges, faces etched with the hollow relief of survivors, while Elena checked his vitals, her palms still faintly stained despite the scrub down. "You're her," he croaked, locking eyes with her, the room falling silent as if the world held its breath. "The ghost in the wire, medic from nowhere, pulling me back when the Reaper had my number." The nickname hung there, born from his delirium-fueled vision of her pale, blood-smeared hands flickering like a specter through the smoke of his near-death haze. Ghost medic, whispered like a talisman against the dark. The corpsman who'd laughed shifted uncomfortably, the weight of it landing like a spent round. But Jake wasn't done. His grip tightened on her wrist, pulling her close enough to catch the tremor in his breath. What he confessed next would bind them in a brotherhood deeper than blood, one that no ridicule could touch. Word of the ghost medic spread like wildfire through the base, SEALs from other platoons slipping in with sidelong nods of respect, their usual bravado softened by stories of her ungloved miracles, saving a demo expert's leg when the saw was already warming up, whispering calm to a kid Marine as he flatlined and fired back. Elena waved it off at first, trading her wrecked gloves for a fresh pair that felt foreign, too clean against the grit baked into her soul. But the name stuck, etched into morale briefings and care packages from home. Yet in the quiet hours, when the tent emptied and the wind howled like lost souls outside, she'd sit by Jake's cot, sharing fragments of lives interrupted. His tales of dive quals in Coronado, her memories of stargazing with her brother before the Corps claimed him. "You didn't just fix my chest," he admitted one night, voice thick with the vulnerability only the edge of death carves out. "You reminded me why we fight, for the ones who can't." Their connection deepened there. Two warriors forged in different fires, hands clasping across the invisible lines of rank and role. And as his strength returned, step by halting step, she realized the ridicule had been a shield, cracking only when true valor demanded it shatter. Months later, back in the relentless churn of patrols, Jake's team hit another snag. A night raid gone sideways, pinned down in a wadi with hostiles closing like wolves. Bullets whined through the dark, stitching the earth. And when the corpsman took a round to the thigh, it was Jake who radioed in, his voice steady, but laced with that old fire. "Ghost medic, we need you, now." Elena was stateside by then, honorably discharged after her tour's toll-carved lines too deep for another extension. But the call came through channels, a frantic relay that yanked her from civilian shadows into the fray. She flew commercial to Bagram, then hitched a helo ride, arriving with a med kit scavenged from her garage and gloves she'd worn threadbare on purpose, a talisman of their shared ghosts. Dropping into the hot zone, she worked under fire, her hands steady as she tied off the bleeder, Jake covering her with suppressed bursts, their eyes meeting in the strobe of muzzle flashes. "Told you you'd haunt me," he grunted later, bandaged and airborne, the team alive because of her shadow. In that crucible, sacrifice circled back, her choice to answer not just duty, but the unbreakable thread between them. But the real test waited homeward, where peace demanded its own kind of bravery. Years folded like worn fatigues after that. Jake medically retired with a chest full of hardware and a heart heavier still, trading dive masks for a quiet life in Montana. Fishing poles his new weapons against the nightmares. Elena settled in Virginia, nursing in a VA clinic. Her gloves pristine now, but her stories whispered to vets who needed to hear they weren't alone. The ridicule from that dusty tent, a faded scar, outshone by the legend she'd unwittingly built. Then came the letter, postmarked from a ranch out west, Jake's handwriting steady as his aim. An invite to a team reunion, but underlined twice. The real reason: need my ghost medic to stand witness. She drove through autumn rains, the Blue Ridge fading into endless plains, arriving at a firelit clearing where SEALs and spouses gathered, laughter mingling with the pop of embers. Jake waited at the edge, older, grayer, but his grin pure Harlan, pulling her into a bear hug that smelled of pine and gun oil. "You saved more than lives that night," he said, voice low as the group quieted, pulling a small box from his pocket. Inside, a custom challenge coin gleamed, her silhouette in fatigues, gloves ethereal, ghost medic engraved beneath. The team raised glasses, toasts rippling like waves, but it was Jake's final words, murmured just for her, that sealed it. "You pulled me from the dark, Elena. Now let me thank the woman who made the ghost real." As stars wheeled overhead, hands linked in a circle of scarred survivors, the fire's warmth chased old chills, a bittersweet reminder that some bonds, forged in hell, glow eternal. And in that shared silence, with laughter rising again, Elena knew the whispers of war had given way to echoes of home, pulling them all a little closer to the light.